Welcome to The Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have, so be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
Today is going to be the battle of the O states.
Yeah.
To see which one is not doing better than the other.
I
talking
think
about Oklahoma and Ohio here.
Yeah.
Some of you might already know what we're going to be talking about, but should make for a spirited discussion.
I think so. Before then, I think we've talked before about how we choose movies to watch as a family. But as a recap, the rule in the household is that we go, reader gets to choose a movie that we watch. Then we watch a Star Trek. Currently, we're on Voyager. We're so close to being done with the series. Then we watch another show. Currently, we're on The Bear. And then Go chooses 2 episodes of TV again. And then you and I split off getting to choose before it goes back to reader.
Correct.
And it's often a challenge to find things that the boys want. One of the biggest challenges is probably that like a good 30% of the time, Go just wants a movie about mechs, and there just aren't enough movies about mechs made in the world to satisfy that craving. But yeah, that's how we do it. And I think what we wanted to talk about is kind of how we think about choosing what movies might be appropriate or might not. I am positive that our definition differs from a lot of other families, considering that this year we watched Goodfellas.
Yeah.
And how sometimes that is surprising or goes a little bit awry.
Yeah, well, we're watching Hocus Pocus right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it's not necessarily what we expected, but what I'm thinking back to most recently is how we were watching The Breakfast Club. And, I took so much of that movie for granted all these years, but now watching it as a parent, there's some real creepy, like, John Hughes has a crush on 16-year-old Molly Ringwald, stuff that I just kind of like accepted as being a part of the movie. And so it's part of this beloved movie. And so I gave it a pass, but now I found myself watching it and like really cringing for the first time at it. I should have been cringing all along, I suppose, but I guess that I chalk it up to my growth as a person. But wow, yeah, that definitely sparked some conversations with the boys about, appropriate behavior with other people's bodies.
Yeah, because that one was a shock to me because I always felt kind of high and mighty because like we now all recognize how terrible 16 Candles was. And I never liked that movie, even at the time. So I was kind of feeling like I had the right perception of those movies way back in the day. But I have to say, like, probably when I was growing up, Breakfast Club was my favorite of all of them. I think it's probably the one I watched the most. And it did not hold up at all as well as I thought it was going to. I think in the end, we have to all admit that, well, I don't know. I don't know now where I come down between Pretty in Pink and is it Some Kind of Wonderful? Yeah.
Yes.
Some Kind of Wonderful. I think those two...
Which, Some Kind of Wonderful and Pretty in Pink both sparked really interesting conversations with the boys about about class
Mm-hmm.
and wealth, and also the much more cliquish nature of high school experience back in the 80s, and how today, because of a number of reasons, people who otherwise would be outcasts can find people to form their own in-group far easier than you could previously in previous generations.
Yeah.
And so in a certain regard, even though you'll still have like rich kids who are jerks, or jocks who are jerks, or, you know, like popular kids who deep down have a heart of gold and are just popular because they're charismatic or whatever, like there's going to be more of like, oh, you're into like this specific genre of anime. Cool. You know, here's your in group, the universe says, and you can find it, which is pretty sweet, online or in person or a hybrid of both. So
Also, like, we will see as the boys get older, but my
Yeah.
sense is that people tend to be more parts of different groups now. There's not as much of this like single definition where you are one thing.
yeah, but it's kind of tricky as, you know, as somebody who loves film and TV, to begrudgingly find myself seeing this new wave of warnings ahead of older films and TV shows. And by older, I mean, oh my God, we're watching Austin Powers and it has this now. But seeing
For
these
good
warnings
reason.
about
For
seeing
damn
these
good
warnings
reason.
about seeing these warnings about cultural depictions and sensitivity issues, and you know, then the boys see stuff in those movies and TV shows that we properly should find objectionable. Like, I'm sorry, Will Ferrell and brown face and a fez. That I, you know, it. If it was the 70s, I would have been like, fine, whatever. But this is like 90s, like 90s. And then they bring it back again for The Spy Who Shagged Me.
Yeah.
There is a lot. There's a lot happening. And plus, like, I get Austin is a piss take on James Bond, a Lothario, and we understand that going into it. But there's a lot of like old school handsiness, weirdness that happened that we had to end up like talking to the boys about, that goes beyond just him being like a caricature of a ladies' man.
And then Fat Bastard in Austin Powers. I was driving the boys to camp, and we were talking about that character and how, like, just imagine if you're in a bigger body watching that film, where like the whole joke is your very existence is disgusting. And of course they do things to that character to make him extra disgusting. Like, he's constantly drooling over himself, covered in food, but like, ugh. Yeah. And going back to Breakfast Club,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, obviously, so it's, you know, teens in detention, all from different social groups, and how they kind of come together. And the rich girl falls in love with Johnny, who's this sort of bad boy whose dad abuses him, and he's the one who has weed, and, you know. And there are a couple parts that, like, I knew were awful that we'd have to talk about. Like, there's a point where Johnny hides under the desk where Claire, the rich girl, is sitting. Yeah. And she's wearing a skirt, and he puts his face between her legs. And, like, that is so inappropriate. But, you know, in the end, Claire kind of falls for him. And I remember totally being down with that as a kid and thinking that made perfect sense. And watching it again, I really felt like it was completely unjustified. Like, looking back, I'm like, all he does is make fun of her for being a virgin the entire movie. And then she's like, I like you. I don't know. that was inexplicable. And the other thing I realized that I never thought about is, they really sort of get into each of the kids' backstories and why they're in detention and what happened to them. And each of the young men gets this like fully like monologued out backstory.
Yep.
And the two women, you don't know. Like the best you get is one, Ali Sheedy's character is amazing.
Yep.
Like the best character in the movie. So cool. You get glimpses, like she might want to run away and her parents ignore her, but you have like no idea what that's really like. And all you ever hear about Claire is that her like parents don't like each other. But nothing, I don't know. I was really surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, media and the kids and pairing our childhoods with theirs is proving so much more interesting than I thought it would. I thought it'd just be as simple as, oh, here's this thing that I loved when I was younger and through my young adulthood. Let's rewatch it now for the first time in ages. And then in rewatching it, I now realize how much I've grown as a person where my perspective on these things in some cases has drastically changed. It's very cool. Very cool. And it also speaks to how important it is to be more skeptical about the sort of media that you consume as a family, especially things that you would probably take for granted. Because I just gave these things a blanket pass. I didn't even consider like looking to anything that I might feel is objectionable now. And then I started thinking, oh man, now I feel like common sense media in my own way, which if you guys out there don't know is it's a right leaning, like a conservative organization that is set up for parents to be able to weigh in on various aspects of films and TV shows. So that way other parents can log on and see what they might find objectionable for their kids.
Okay, but I will say very useful tool.
Sure, I'm not saying it's not, but I felt like I in general dislike it only because every time I log on to it to look something up, I'm like, yeah, all their objections are shit.
No, but see, that's why you can't use it.
And then I felt like my own version of that in watching Austin Powers and The Breakfast Club. I'm like, oh man, wow, I have to be more skeptical about what we're doing. Like, I can't just get down on them doing it because I view that organization as puritanical. Like, I need to be more skeptical on my own end.
Yeah. So little hint on common sense media, because I actually use it a lot.
Yes,
but you can't go on the ratings. Like, you can't look to see what age parents suggest media for, because it's just like,
it's laughable.
Depending on your child, right? So
yeah, exactly.
That's useless. One, I also find it interesting that like kids can rate. So they'll have the age rating from parents. The
teenagers coming in to rate are hilarious because you have the parents panning it for sex and the teenagers come in to be like, don't think about the whole sex thing because it's like one butt.
Yeah. but that's the thing. Like, if you are
like bad role models and the kids are like, this movie's great.
Yeah. That is fun. But like, the nice thing is, since I feel like parents who rate it tend to be more puritanical than I would be, it's great because they're going to call out anything that happens. So I'm not taking their opinion of all those things, but it's just nice to get like a full rundown of everything.
Right, you look at the incidents, right? But that's what I do too. I don't look at their ratings. I laugh at the puritanical nature of it, but then I look at the stuff that's in it. And every time I've looked, it's been like, oh yeah, this is no big deal. And so I've stopped bothering.
No, I mean, I remember it was so funny because I was looking for Venom.
Yeah.
And somebody was like, it was so scary. You can see him bite somebody's head off. And I'm like, this was going to be fine. They're going to think this is great. And then there's also a section called What You Need to Know. And that's where like the site does a review with anything that could be questionable. And I find that very helpful. So, and usually it's stuff that's fine to watch, but I'm like, oh, we might want to say something about this. Or also like I use it a lot for movies that I've seen and liked, but like I can't remember if there's stuff that's going to be maybe questionable or too scary. It's like a good refresher where I can be like, I think that was good, but like I can't quite remember. And you know, I can go back and be reminded.
Indeed.
Is there anything that you thought you were going to dislike or that was going to be more questionable that like pleasantly surprised you? Because I feel like that's happened to me too, but I'm not thinking
like
of
with
any.
What?
Just like movies we've watched.
Yeah. What were we watching the other day? I'll remember it after we're done recording, of course. But you know, yes, there have been times that we've been watching stuff where I've been pleasantly surprised. It was something that you wanted to see. Was it a musical? I think it was one of yours. That's all I remember. It was something that I didn't choose and something the boys didn't choose. But I was like, yeah, this doesn't suck nearly as hard as I thought it would. Well, we have somewhat different tastes.
Yeah. No, so, I mean,
and that's a good thing. I like that we have somewhat different tastes. We make each other broaden horizons. Like I like, you know, exploitation, like gruesome sex horror, and you like, you know, musicals.
That is such a misrepresentation.
I'm joking. For anyone who doesn't know, Moms and I connected early in our relationship over David Cronenberg, so that's kind of more of a joke than anything else.
Yeah. Speaking of, I think we were just talking about how we could probably watch The Fly.
Yes, I can't wait.
Yeah. That might be worth looking up on Common Sense Media.
Just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
See, I wanted to watch Crimes of the Future just because I haven't seen it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But you said no to that. But I'll take The Fly. I think after The Fly, we should watch Scanners. Some of the best makeup effects in the history of cinema. Some of the best.
Well,
I love that movie. Michael Ironside, like blood spouting out of his. I love that movie. Sorry. I love Cronenberg.
And you know, now we're there because I'm thinking about that one and I'm like, I have to look.
Brood.
Oh, that one's so funny.
Oh, yeah.
And now I'm like, I really have to look these up because like we could possibly totally watch Scanners. I can't remember.
It's just all it is violence.
Uh-huh.
And like, you know, it's pretty gruesome. But we've seen RoboCop.
Yeah.
Like they watched, you know, what's his name get liquefied in the toxic waste and have his head roll up, Lewis's windshield.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't Lewis's windshield. Rolled up. Who got melted? Yes, it was. It was Lewis's windshield. Yeah, he veered off into the toxic waste. I love that movie. I need to watch it again clearly because I'm misremembering my favorite part.
Yeah. Well, who knows? That one of the best summers I ever spent in New York. There was this indie film house and it was like in an old high school or something, like happens in New York. And that summer they just played all of Cronenberg's movies.
Oh, wow.
And like back to his like, I don't know if they were student films, but they were like definitely not like wide release things. And that was when I discovered, is it correct to say Nepalese food?
Yes.
Because it was a little...
No, it's not correct to say Nepalese food.
How do you say it?
Nepalese.
Okay. Because there was a little restaurant down the street from there. And that was just like, that was the best.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Butter tea.
Yeah.
That whole thing.
Really good dumplings. All right. So despite recording about it twice for the last episode, I still have more things to say about the Ten Commandments. It's short, though. It's really short.
I'm gonna channel my inner Roy Kent.
Okay. So this is all I had to get off my chest. I was like, is this an Instagram post or is it too long for an Instagram post? We will see. So what they have been saying about insisting that the Ten Commandments be in classrooms, and what they said back in the day when they like wanted them in all the courtrooms too, or like to have monuments outside courthouses with the Ten Commandments, is that it's the basis for all our laws, which is like clearly bullshit. But I was thinking about it, and in the last episode, I talked about how, you know, the parts of the Ten Commandments that we can agree on are something that sort of every society comes to on its own. But I was thinking about it, and I think what laws prove is that the Ten Commandments are completely worthless, because I was thinking about different societies, and to a degree, you know, most societies agree that killing and stealing are wrong because that just creates kind of a wild society that's hard to control. But thinking about how different countries deal with things, what it made me think about is that what truly matters are the details and subtlety. Because what's so important about laws is that you can have those commandments, but where all of like the morality comes in is in the details. So, you know, you can say the killing is wrong, but like every society has exceptions that they make to that. You know, most societies make an exception for war. Certainly the Bible does. Most societies make an exception for self-defense, though obviously, you know, there are certain religious groups that won't fight in wars that don't make that exception.
Mm-hmm.
Most societies don't agree that thieving is wrong, but like we had Robin Hood as a hero, because when you have, you know, one group stealing, there's a certain sort of allowance that we make morally for taking from somebody who's taken something unjustly. So when we look at different groups and separate ourselves, it is not in the broad strokes that we are different. It is in all of the details.
Yeah, because morality beyond being is both objective and subjective, which is something that, you know, religious apologists will never openly accept, even though that's how they have to practice it. Like the moment that you have an objective, you can then compare actions toward that objective. And that subjective determination is your morality. So morality being a determination regarding some sort of objective, some sort of goal, means that you know, like we've talked about with humanism, if you peel back goals far enough, you get to humanism. It's when you try to complicate things with trying to claim that another being has opinions about things that are themselves the objective, that making that being happy is the ultimate objective, that you can run into problems because you're then like muddying your own morality, because you as a person will most likely, most of the time, default to practicing humanism with your in-group. But the issue is that, you know, these monotheistic religions tend to be so tribal that in-group they want to curate as much as they possibly can. And I just pulled this up because we were talking about, you know, the Ten Commandments underpinning legal systems in the West. And you can go to, you know, you could make an argument about how biblically informed the Magna Carta was, I suppose. But I like to go back to the Code of Hammurabi, which predates the Pentateuch. Mm-hmm. So this is before the Hebrew Bible was written. And it has provisions against false testimony, false charges, falsification of judgments. It has provisions against stealing and kidnapping and harboring fugitive slaves, breaking and entering and burglaring. And it has, provisions for the duties of farmers and debts, irrigation offenses, cattle trespass. It has provisions for loans and trade and fraud. Obviously, like all sorts of family stuff, like, definition of marriage, prohibition again of adultery and remarriage and divorce and incest. And, it has murder, provisions for murder and assault causing miscarriage. It has provisions for agriculture and rates of hire. It has provisions for purchase of slaves, denial of mastership of people who want to purchase slaves. It has all sorts of things that you could then look to the Ten Commandments and say, okay, well, the Ten Commandments are far less granular.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're just broader, but within the context of the Pentateuch, those are codes that were given to God's people. White Christian apologists in America, technically speaking, because since they like to be so technical about the Bible, they are not included in that in-group. Just because they like to talk about these things doesn't mean that they are of that in-group. That technically speaking, if you want to like be really anal about it, they are not Paleo-Hebrews. The Ten Commandments, it was a code for God's people. So they might want to be a part of that group. That doesn't mean that they actually are. And it's just really fascinating. Because there is a conversation, I think, to be had about that and what is the veracity of the Ten Commandments and what are the Ten Commandments blind spots. Like I've said before, the 7 tenets of the Satanic Temple, like I'm not a card carrying member of the Satanic Temple, but the 7 tenets are based on humanism. And so that makes them much naturally more aligned with my philosophy. Obviously I don't speak for everyone, but it's just an interesting conversation to have.
Well, and the other thing I was thinking about is that the parts of the Old Testament that really are in the weeds, is it Deuteronomy and
Leviticus?
Like, that's the part that nobody follows anymore.
Yeah.
They're just like, no, yeah. we don't like the details.
Well,
I mean, of course,
Nana
because it's from like a
shrimp.
Totally different time in society. It doesn't make sense anymore. But if what you're really concerned about is the laws handed down, like, I do think there's something to be said for the fact that where they do get really into handing down laws, everybody's like, pass. It's a lot. It's a lot to follow.
It really is. I mean, 613 is a big number to keep track of.
Yeah. And it is a lot to follow, and it doesn't make any sense. And I'm glad people don't, but like...
No, some of them make total sense.
Well,
and those are the ones that have stuck around through, centuries of scientific development, philosophical improvement. And, there's a reason why they've stuck around. Why, as society has grown increasingly secular, why the prohibitions haven't changed. Like, it's circular to say that what's in the Bible is true because the Bible says. You have to find a way outside of the Bible to demonstrate that it is. And what you said before of like all these different cultures having a sort of, without even ever having any direct communication with each other, there's a confluence of these sort of core principles about the determination of self, the protection of autonomy, right? Property rights. And you boil it down enough and most of it will end up aligning, which is which is the much better way of approaching these things, I think, as a humanist, at least. But, I'm not a scientist or a credentialed philosopher. I've published nothing. This is all just me sort of looking at how we are as people and reading enough about the ancient world and its varying social codes to see like a Venn diagram. And that's what I fear will be lost if the Christian nationalists have their way.
Speaking of Christian nationalists having their way, unfortunately, Louisiana's absurd law is not the only absurd law we have as a problem in the U.S. right now.
Yeah. Now, the Oklahoma, because we were talking about Oklahoma and Ohio, the battle of the O states, look, they're showing us their O face. Like, Oklahoma definitely, I think, did the worst thing.
That was my sense. So,
because Ohio, like, I can make an argument in favor of Ohio doing what Ohio is doing.
Okay, well, let's tell folks what the O's have been up to.
So, Oklahoma, the state superintendent, Ryan Walters, sent a directive saying that is compulsory and immediate for compliance purposes. So this is for 5th to 12th graders, so 11 to 18-year-olds. That the Bible is an indispensable historical and cultural touchstone. I'm quoting, without basic knowledge of it, Oklahoma students are unable to properly contextualize the foundation of our nation. Yeah. So one, you can do this until you're blue in the face and they'll never admit it.
Well, okay. So what is Oklahoma saying people need to do because of that?
Jesus and God are not in the Constitution. Anyway, that it has to be taught that,
in public schools.
Yes.
And was it as literature, or does it not specify?
No, they actually have to teach it as a way of framing what the founders intended. So what they're doing is they're using it to groom children. Oh, of course, we love that word, don't we? They're using it to groom children into Christian nationalism, into this really flawed view that the founders, regardless of what they said in their letters, in any like treaty or bill or piece of legislation or official government documents, none of that matters, because look over here, we're teaching the Bible as the foundation of that. So just pay attention to your teacher when the teacher says the Bible is the foundation of America. Like, it teaches no nuance, which I think is far more interesting, that you had a bunch of people who came together from differing cultural and religious backgrounds to agree that no one religion should have, supremacy, culturally. And that goes out the window, because what they really meant was that the Bible was the rule of the law, or was the law of the land, and that everything they did was in service of how great the 10 Commandments were. So we have to teach the 10 Commandments. We have to teach the Bible, not just as literal, but we have to give it like this sort of special historical mention where the teachers are then encouraged, beyond just having to teach aspects about the Bible, that they're then encouraged, based on their religious leanings, to go that extra step, because they've been given the mandate that they have to talk about it. And so now what they talk about with it is then more or less up to them and their stridency, is the sense that I get. But like all of these Christian nationalist, nonsensical things, it is it cares less about the nuance and the details, which is ultimately what's going to get a lot of it into hot water, I think, than it does about just putting that performative air of look how Jesus-y we are. We're more Jesus-y than that state over there. And I don't know, is like, it feels real gross. But that's Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So F Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is plenty of pushback already, including the Interfaith Alliance, capital I, capital A, which is a national group comprised of all sorts of different, faiths and religions and that their sole goal is to protect religious freedom across the board for everybody. And they called it, quote, blatant religious coercion. True religious freedom means ensuring that no one religious group is allowed to impose their viewpoint on all Americans. And it's Sunday school and public schools for everybody. Like what sort of pushback we're going to get from this? I don't know. I know Louisiana is already facing suits. I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm sure they'll face
I wouldn't
suits.
I wouldn't be surprised if Oklahoma doesn't face suits in quick order. But I think that Ohio, even though it seems scary and, Handmaid's Tale-ish, I think it actually could, like, the devil's advocate in me says that it could have positive benefits, not for the kids of the families involved, but for everybody else in society at large.
All right. So tell us about what Ohio's doing.
Or maybe not. Maybe it'll just make the idiocracy work worse. But so
and this law is not passed. This law is being debated currently.
Correct. It's introduced. The bills have been introduced to the Ohio legislature. So I'm quoting WKRC, not to be confused with the fictional WKRP, out of Cincinnati, which I didn't know until right now. WKRP was just, one letter changed for a radio station in Cincinnati, WKRC. Anyway, public school districts and charter schools across the state would be required to create a policy allowing parents to remove kids during the school day for religious classes outside the school under a newly introduced bill. And quote, the lady who introduced the bill in the legislature said, parents have the right to direct their child's education. I agree. They have the right to direct their child's religious education as well. I agree. Our children don't belong to the state and they don't belong to the community. I agree, said Click. The children, and when I say I agree, I'm saying me as dad. Yeah. Pops agrees. The children are the parents' responsibility, not the schools. I agree. The state doesn't own the children. Agree again. The parents are the ones who are responsible for the upbringing of their children, for the directing of their education, whether it's their academic education or their religious education. Agree. Specifics in the bill include the following. 1, parents must get permission from the district if they are to do this. And they or the religious organization would be responsible for transporting students. Great. 2, the religious organization in question would be liable for the students during that time. Great. 3, kids couldn't leave during so-called core classes at their real school, with districts able to determine what those are. Muddy, but I guess acceptable for now until what is deemed core actually isn't something that should be. Or something is left off of the list that should be, I should say. 4, no public resources could be spent on any such program. Great. And 5, students would need to make up any work missed while off campus. So I look at all of that and I'm like, fine, great. Let them practice their religious freedom. My kids don't have to be a part of their expression of their religious freedom. If the kids are negatively impacted by this, that's their parents' fault for needing them to go do religious school during the day. I'm looking at it this way. Like, I used to teach in Los Angeles. I taught in Beverly Hills and I taught in the San Fernando Valley, both of which had a high degree of Jewishness. I taught a number of Jewish students over the time. I would say conservatively half of my students over the time I was a teacher were Jewish of some sort or another. Obviously, like there are varying intensities of, Jewishness and practice, but a lot of them who weren't just secular, those children would also go to Hebrew school. Now, this was in addition to the regular schooling. So they would go to Hebrew school at a shul or at their synagogue every week, several times a week. And this would be schoolwork in addition to the schoolwork they would have in their secular education. It was a lot of work for those kids. I'm guessing that the religious education that these like, I'm going to go on a limb, I'm going to say like mostly white bread, super Protestant kids are going to get isn't going to be nearly as rigorous as what my Jewish students had to endure. And I say endure because it was a lot of work. Me being a kid who did go through catechism classes and did his confirmation and all that sort of jazz, like my guess is that what they have to do for their version of religious education isn't going to be nearly as robust or rigorous. But nonetheless, you can't say that they're not allowed to, so long as it doesn't impact the school population at large. And so long as, the school's standards aren't impacted. Now, devil's advocate in me says, on the other hand, this is a horrible idea because a lot of these schools, their funding is affected by testing metrics. And so if you have these kids leave during the day and then produce worse test scores, those public schools will get less state funding. Thus, moving everything that much closer towards the whole charter privatization thing that the Christian right actually wants. So this could be a low-key way of using, the mantle of religious freedom to like erode funding for public schools due to those religious kids they claim to care so much about actually testing poorly and defunding the schools without intending it. I don't know. Maybe that's like conspiracy theory in me.
Right now, I'm on the Center for Inquiry, who just had an action alert about this. And one thing you did not bring up is that the bill would allow public high school students to earn up to 2 units of high school credit for completing a release time course in religious instruction.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Yeah. And to me, that's the bigger concern, because now that is, I think, where you get the real erosion, where you have public schools giving credit for religious instruction. How are we deciding what religious instruction would be allowable under that?
Yeah.
Right? Like I
am sure that the students I used to teach who would have to go to Hebrew school would have loved to have gotten like secular credit for their religious education.
But I think that is really tricky because, again, I think with that, we're going to see, religious groups that are in the majority get very easy approval for that.
Yep.
And religious groups that are in the minority not get approval for that.
It's almost like it's tribal.
It is.
It's almost like it's always been tribal.
And then I'm thinking about, and this is not unique to Ohio. I should have looked, but I believe there are other states that have at least had similar programs. And the issue to me is if you have a school where not a lot of kids are taking advantage of that kind of law, then if 1 or 2 kids leave class and go and do something, it's not going to have a big impact. But if you have a school where most kids are part of one church or, religious group, and suddenly, 40% of the school goes off to a class, if you are not part of that group and your friends are, that is, that can create real pressure on kids who are not part of the in-group. in a way that I don't think should be happening in public schools.
Mm.
Also, I mean, I don't.
Funding for like art and music and phys ed.
Oh yeah, which is hard enough.
Which is hard enough. Like that's going to be eroded. So like I said, like it's gross, but if you look at it at the top level, it states that it's not intending to do anything bad. But play devil's advocate for 5 minutes and you're going to come with a whole host of reasons why it erodes the best part of public schools. It erodes community. It depletes resources. Even though they claim that public funding isn't going to be used for those programs, the existence of those programs is going to reprioritize what the schools necessarily need to care about. And then, the kids have to play catch up. How are they going to get help with that? Is the school going to start, expending resources to help those kids get remedial education, like weekend courses for the kids who are doing the religious school during the week? I mean, it's technically not funding the program, it's funding the remedy for the program. So, you know what I mean? Like, would they consider that a loophole?
And look, I think in some ways it's absurd that our school day does not match the work day. It creates just like horrible issues for parents in families where both parents are working. It comes from a time that is very different and just makes everything for parents so much harder.
They should make the work day match the school day.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure I can get an amen from everybody listening to that one.
Indeed. But the reality is the school day does not match the work day. And so kids have time outside of school to prioritize things they care about.
Like religion.
And there is nothing keeping parents from doing religious education outside of the school day. So this is really a law, everything that's called out in the law that you read through
could be handled as an after-school program.
There's nothing stopping parents. In fact, I feel like one of the issues in a lot of communities is like for all those times where parents need coverage, the only things available are religious. Like this is an issue for lots of people where the only summer camps are religious. Mm-hmm. Call out to Camp Quest, which is a non-religious summer camp. So cool.
In Ohio.
In Ohio, but also there were, I think, only 3 of those around the country. And so there are just like huge areas where the only summer camps are religious, the only after school programs are religious. And it's already a huge issue for secular parents. So I don't think it's the religious people with the problem. Right? This is solving a problem that doesn't exist.
Well, that's like God. Yeah, you're born dirty. That's why you need the blood of Christ, because you were born dirty. How do I know? Bible says so.
And I also have to wonder, because when I was in high school, I got permission to leave campus to take an interior design course at a local art college.
If I were to have a religion, it would be interior design.
That I could sort of go for. But I actually have like a whole theory now about interior design and like ghosts and paranormal experiences, but I'll save that for another day. But
what?
Yeah, I'll get to it at some point. Just a little teaser.
We need to circle back on that one.
Okay. But I think, and I got permission to do like a writing class with my mom's amazing friends, which is like one of the most, just like an incredible experience to get critiqued by, real writers and editors. And I was able to do that. So I also feel like probably if parents really cared, and grant, and I think I did get credit for that, but I had to present all of my work to one of the English teachers at the school. So I think if parents really, really cared, like they could probably make some things happen depending on, like even if it's non-religious, like I think most schools work with parents for these kind of things. I think when you call out a certain kind of instruction in a bill to make it exceptionally easy to do this thing, it's really to push parents down that path. Yes. Right? Like it's not saying like, oh, for a handful of parents where this is like a high concern and a really big issue, we're putting this in place because they've been kept from what they're doing. I don't think it's that. I think it's let's set up the standard so that a lot of religious groups can jump on it, create programs so it's easy for parents to pull them out, like create the systems to encourage this in bigger numbers. So that is my other issue. I don't think it's responding to something. I think it's saying, like, let's make something to put in place, a thing that wasn't there before that will encourage parents to take this option.
Mm.
And I don't think we need to be doing that in public schools that already have, so much to do.
Crushing financial obligations.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, we are such supporters of arts and music education. We love that we're going to a school district that really, truly values the student body and takes great pride in the quality of the education.
Arts and
that's part of it, the quality of the education. Like, we're moving to an artsy town, and this is an artsy place in an artsy town, and they take it very, very seriously. And, I love that we're going to be somewhere that has the wealth and resources to, in a sense, insulate itself from some of the issues that other school districts in the state might not be able to do. But, like, the humanist in me just, like, is really sad and pissed off that anybody has to see their child go through this. Like, I can't imagine being a parent at a school that is vast majority WASP, and they're like, a Hindu family, and then they gradually have fewer and fewer friend relationships for the reasons you mentioned. It's just like, I can't imagine the heartbreak. And ultimately, the people that create these laws don't care, because all they want is homogeneity. And it's gruesome. And the country will only suffer for it, because diversity of opinion and thought is one of the things that makes our secular republic strong. Like, it is. And you can say that, whatever you want about your version of Christianity, but these are the same people that these Christian apologists in America are 99% of them are Protestant, but then they lean on Catholics, the early church fathers, when they start talking about, some of their favorite pet apologetics, but then they'll turn around and call Catholics not real Christians. And it's such a strange, twisted mess, their morality, when it comes to this sort of thing. Like, I can't understand how they make it happen, how they produce this is a great idea result, morally speaking. Like, other kids' families don't matter as much because that's what Jesus would have wanted. I don't know. It seems pretty gross.
Yeah. So can we agree Oklahoma most gross, but it's all gross?
Oklahoma most gross, but it's all gross. It being like the whole push towards Christian nationalism, is that what it is?
Religion in public schools.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oklahoma, super nasty. Ohio remains to be seen. Let's hope that it doesn't get put through the legislature.
Yeah. Also, in Ohio, good to read this with something that's already passed that gives state money to people who leave for religious private schools. It all seems of a kind.
Yeah.
So you can see a thread. But shout out to public school teachers who are dealing with this.
Yeah, I can't.
No shout out to the public school teachers who are thrilled for the chance to teach all their kids about the Bible, but huge shout out to the public school teachers who are like, oh, now what do I do?
Well, I mean, you're leaving out the school teachers that would side with us, who are excited about
Oh,
having more of a mandate to teach the Bible from a secular lens.
yes. No, extra shout out to those folks. I did see
Like
one person.
they are the front lines of the front lines. Be like, okay, we're talking about the Bible today. Let's turn to Exodus 21, shall we? Raise your hand before we do. Raise your hand if you think slavery is bad.
Yeah. No,
now keep your hands up if you think slavery is bad. Only some of the time. And everybody puts their hands down. All right. Let's go to Exodus 21.
Yeah.
It's just like...
double shout out to those folks. No thanks to all the teachers who are so excited about the chance to make all of their students little Christians, and just all the feelings for those who have to somehow navigate these murky waters when what they just want to do is teach their subject.
Yeah. It's just such a waste of time. Like, we don't have time to waste.
No.
Like, global ecology is falling apart in so many ways. And we need kids who are well educated to help hold society together geopolitically, while also coming up with like real world scientific solutions and technological solutions that can help us survive and thrive into the future, despite our past transgressions as a society. And I just don't see any of that happening with this myopic, like, religious mandate. Like, it is such a phenomenal step backward. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's the sort of step backward that even the people that are championing it now, I fear, may be forced to agree that the dumbing down of a generation.
They're not going to care.
Not all of them are acting out of things other than a fear response for an increasingly secularized society. You know, like, I have to believe that they are not as homogenous as they would like to think they are, that they do not necessarily think in lockstep. I know you can grumble all you want, but I am, like my father, a man of the people, and I fundamentally see the good in all people.
Well,
and I would love to think, I'm going to hope that even people who are championing this now would, if it yields a negative educational result, be brave enough, be humble enough to go back and say, yeah, this was a bad idea. We actually do need to teach more science, because praying over like the third pandemic this year is not helping.
I don't know. Well, I'm glad you have hope.
You have to have hope.
Should we wrap it up there?
Sure. Before I start quoting Timothy and evidence of things unseen.
All right. So we have to thank Jonathan Zalben.
Or is that Hebrews? Timothy and Hebrews. I forget which one talks about faith in that way.
No, I'm not.
That's my bad. I have to go back and read my Bible.
Yeah.
Maybe I should move to Oklahoma.
And First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
And that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids. Hang on a second. What? Somebody's at the door. Yeah. There is an open house listed online.
Great.
There is no open house.
Yes.
I had to tell these nice people. And so I just answered some of their questions.
Yeah.
So I'm coming back.
Okay.